Hey, welcome to another exciting edition of the Give Me Liberty podcast. We have the author of the latest book, Saving Aziz, Chad Robichaux, in the house on the Give Me Liberty podcast, starting now. Hey, welcome to a very exciting and special edition of the Give Me Liberty podcast. I'm joined by a friend, no stranger to Liberty University, certainly no stranger to the Standing for Freedom Center, Chad Robichaux. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me here.
Hey man, it's awesome. I'm so glad you're here on campus. I know you're doing a men's event tonight.
Yeah,
Ignite,
yeah.
Super exciting. We're going to be a part of that as well. I just want to mention the book that came out in January, Saving Aziz, how the mission to help one became a calling to rescue thousands from the Taliban. Incredible. So we're talking about August of 2021, but actually it goes all the way back to April of 2021. Tell us a little bit about this story.
Yeah, well, I mean, day two of President Biden being in office, he announced he was going to do the complete and full withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, which, first of all, I knew would be a catastrophic mistake. The United States population had been lied to for a long time by saying we're in a 20-year war, we're in an endless war, American sons and daughters are dying, we have to pull out. We had 2,500 troops there. We had, at the time of the evacuation, we had 4,000 troops. And I mean, I could name 10 places right now in the world that we have contingents of 2,500 to 4,000 troops, Djibouti, Africa, all over the world. But they made Afghanistan this big misrepresentation of we're in a war. In 2018, we had shifted to the support and advisory role of the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police. And the entire international community were participating, supporting the Afghan National Army, and we were keeping the Taliban at bay in the mountains of Afghanistan where they belong. And the White House did not talk to the international community. They didn't talk to the Afghan government we spent 20 years putting in place. They took the White House and the U.S. State Department and negotiated with our enemy of 20 years, the Taliban, to turn that country over, not to the Taliban, but to our enemies, China, Iran, Pakistan, ISI. That's who was going to benefit from this. So I knew it was going to be a catastrophic mistake. In addition to withdrawal and that fear of leaving that in that capacity, it's not consistent with how we've handled post-war historically and been successfully historically in the United States. We still have 55,000 troops in Japan since World War II, right. 40,000 troops in Germany since World War II, 35,000 troops in South Korea since the Korean War. Like, these small contingents keep stability in the world and keep us from wars, not put us in these long wars that people kind of misrepresent. They keep us from war. So I knew that was going to be catastrophic. Obviously, in January, I can't do anything about that. But one thing I could do something about is Americans being left behind, our allies being left behind, and most importantly in my mind at that time was my friend Aziz being left behind. And that was about April that I started working on getting Aziz out. Who Aziz is, to me, is he was more than just my interpreter. He was my interpreter for 8 deployments, which is not normal. But I did 8 deployments as part of a Joint Special Operations Command task force, and with a very unique job of working singleton, meaning I was alone. And Aziz was the interpreter assigned to me, so I'd have a cultural advisor, an interpreter, a teammate trained in how to operate with me. So we spent weeks, months together out in the mountains of Afghanistan, across the border in Pakistan, really doing all the clandestine logistics to set up, go ahead of our unit and set up to put them on target to capture or kill bad guys. And so that was my job, and for all 8 deployments, Aziz was with me, saved my life multiple times.
This is over a period of many years.
Over a period of years, yeah. We, again, over 8 deployments, and he did 15 years with our top tier special operations unit at JSOC. And so, all 8 of those deployments was with him, and most of my time alone. And like I said, he saved my life multiple times, but he probably saved my life every day. Like, don't walk there, don't eat that, don't talk to that person. You talk right now, they're going to kill us. So he really was there for me, and we just became close friends. And when we were not operating in those mountains, I didn't go back to base and he went home. I went to his home. That's who I lived with. I lived with the locals. And the first warm meal I got out of those mountains, coming out of those mountains, was from his wife Hatra, and she cooked us a warm meal. And I was there when his oldest son Mashoud and Mashuda's daughter were born, held him as babies. So his family to me. And to think that I would leave, I would just sit back on my couch while the U.S. is making this horrible mistake, strategically, from a military standpoint, and from an area of national and global security, and just sit back and be mad about it and leave my friend there was just not something I could do. So I made a decision when our government, I was like, if our government's not going to do the right thing, then at least I can for my friend. And I made a decision to go get Aziz, his wife, and 6 kids, and put a team of 12 together, 12 special operations veterans, and that ultimately manifested in the rescue of not just Aziz and his family, but 17,000 people.
You know, I want to point out too, this transcends the sort of the political paradigm of Democrat Republican, because there's a lot of debate that has gone around this, and ironically enough, a lot of bad information, poor information, just in terms of national security, policy, what's in the best strategic interest of the United States. And as you point out, and I think a lot of Americans would probably not know, like you say, that we have these long-standing forward deployments all around the world. If you go and you were to Google search, for example, United States bases, right? And you had a map of the world, you would see dots everywhere, little pin drops everywhere around the world.
We have 4,000 troops in Djibouti, Africa right now. Most Americans don't know that was more than we had in Afghanistan.
Exactly. And so ironically enough, it doesn't matter if you're Republican, if you're a Democrat, a lot of them got this particular issue wrong. And put, first of all, Americans in harm's way by declaring ahead of time, hey, this is when it's going to happen. We'll do it on the anniversary of 9/11, which like if you're an author and you want to come up with some kind of a poetic, point of some sort, and you were to sort of map out a story, it's like, oh, isn't this significant because it's on the 20th anniversary of 9/11? But in many ways, when you say something like that, the enemies then know, and it gives them a lot of power.
Yeah, well, it would have been a poetic statement for the Taliban, because it's like we attacked on and so 20-year anniversary, America's going to surrender. So it's to the veteran community, it was like a slap in the face. Like we're gonna surrender on the anniversary date that the Taliban attacked us, because that's what this was. This was not a strategic withdrawal. It was a full surrender, and anybody that understands military strategy has seen that from the beginning. But when you give that, one of the problems is when you give a date, like he said, September 11th, and they ultimately push it back to August 31st. When you give a date in any negotiations, you lose all leverage, and that's what President Biden did with this. He gave this date, and he did not set terms. Right. And so I'm equally critical, by the way, on President Trump and President Biden for even talking to the Taliban and negotiating with the Taliban. President Trump had a very different position, but I didn't agree that he would speak with them and just being fair. But President Trump had a strategy to handle it differently. One, he would not give Bagram Air Force Base to the Taliban. He would have gave it to our international community, and we would not have forfeited it, because it's the most strategic place on the globe between Iraq, Iran, Russia, and China, and it was not ours to give away. It belonged to an international community. So that would have been one thing President Trump would have did. The other would have been what you're alluding to, is not give a date but give terms. Right. And the terms would have been, if I was in the White House, and if the terms would have been, we will leave. And again, I don't agree with leaving, but if you're going to do this, right, we will leave when we get every American out. We will leave when we get all our allies out. We'll leave when we get all of our equipment, our $85 billion estimated in equipment out. We'll leave then and only then. And if you get in the way, we're not leaving. And if you violate this Doha agreement, we're going to crush you. There's going to be consequences. That's what a strong leader should do, but that's not what we saw. We saw the White House say, this is the date. And they took the NEO operation, a non-combatant evacuation operation, away from the DOD where it belongs, because that's their job. And they gave it to the State Department, who that's not their job. And the State Department treated this like an embassy, which ultimately being an embassy evacuation of our embassy, and an embassy-style evacuation of the Hamid Karzai International Airport, because they have no business, nor do they know how to handle a non-combatant evacuation operation. And our military was not allowed to do their job and evacuate people. They were forced to leave our military bases before we got Americans out, before we got our allies out, before we got equipment out. All ties back to what you're saying, by giving a date and not terms, and it set up the stage for a catastrophic series of events that cost American lives. 13 of our U.S. service members injured, over 60 of them, cost about 160 Afghan civilian lives, and injured about 200 Afghans with that Abbey Gate bomb, that suicide bomb. And additionally, it caused us to leave behind over 1,000 Americans. We know now. The White House was saying 100. But it didn't matter if it's one, by the way. We don't leave an American behind. Right. And where I come from, like, we literally was scorched the earth to go get an American in a war zone.
That's right.
The fact that the White House would be even agreeable to say 100 Even though they knew, by the way, it was thousands. I knew, it's not debatable, they knew that thousands of Americans were still there. So we left thousands of Americans behind in Afghanistan. We left over 75,000 of our allies that fought beside us for 20 years, that we had a contractual obligation to and promise to do the moral and right thing to help them out and their families. I mean, this is 75,000 that served with us, not considering their families, probably 300,000 left them behind, and again, left behind $85 billion of equipment, technology. It was a complete, I hate to use the word blunder or mistake or botched. A lot of people are saying this.
Yeah.
It was, these people that made these decisions, I don't think they're dumb. I don't think this was a mistake. I don't think that they had a strategy and just messed up. Some of these things are not mistakes. They were deliberate decisions made that,
to purposely undermine American power, or American.
I can't speak to motivation. I could just say that it wasn't an accident. My assumptions would be that we have international interest of our enemies to quickly get out of Afghanistan. And so anytime we look for motive, you look for who has something to gain, right?
Right.
And so who has the most to gain for America and leaving Afghanistan in Bagram Air Force Base, this strong military position, to be out of Afghanistan. The only person, America doesn't have anything to gain by it. It hurts America. It hurts our relationships with the international community. It hurts all the international partners that didn't have a say in it to have to leave. So who did it benefit? It benefited Pakistan, ISI, which is their CIA, their intelligence, and the country of Pakistan, who's not an ally, by the way, regardless of what our country says. They're not an ally. They're an enemy of the United States. That's not a popular thing to say, but I have to be honest. They're not an ally.
Well, on this podcast, you can be.
China and Iran. So what China had the most to gain out of it, because China wanted the mineral rights to the Hindu Kush Mountains, trillions of dollars.
It's part of Belt and Road, right?
Right, yeah, trillions of dollars of lithium in there. And they were pressuring the United States, pressuring the White House to say, we want the U.S. military out of there because we want to be able to have access to this. I got called a conspiracy theorist for saying this, but we left on August 31st. In the first week of September, Taliban gave the Chinese the mineral rights to trillions of dollars of minerals in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Additionally, China wanted to be able to get sanctioned oil from Iran, but they couldn't because the U.S. military is in Afghanistan. And so they needed us to leave. And as soon as we left, they start, moving sanctioned oil from Iran to China. And a lot of people would think on the surface that the Taliban is actually the one who took control of Afghanistan. So Pakistan is actually who took control of Afghanistan through the ISI. If you want to look at where all those Taliban came from, they came from right across that border. 75,000 of them came right across the border from Pakistan, trained by the ISI. You could tell in their equipment and tactics how they were trained, and they took 35 provinces in a matter of weeks, which is they took complete Afghanistan. These aren't cavemen. This isn't a terrorist group. This is
highly trained,
organized, backed by world superpowers, by China and Iran. And so when you talk about the Afghan National Army falling, the international community was pulled away from them overnight. All the air support, everything we were providing for 20 years to support them. And now the Afghan National Army is left with nothing, no support. Their president leaves, and they're not facing the Taliban. They're facing China, Iran, Pakistan, and the Taliban as a front face for that. That's what was really happening. And so who had to gain from it? These are all the actors that had to gain from it. And those actors all had put political pressure on the White House to say, hey, we want you to leave Afghanistan.
Right.
And now a president walks in that's willing to do that. And he announced he was going to do it on day 2 of being in office. They signed a Doha Agreement, which a Doha Agreement is a agreement between the United States and the Taliban that says they will not conduct any terrorist activity in Afghanistan. The problem with that on the onset is the Taliban are terrorists.
Right. So it's contradiction in terms.
And then we've seen within days of them starting, one of the first things they did was, as they taken provinces, they lined up 25 of our commandos that we trained and we had relationships with, drug them on the street and executed them in front of everyone, which is a violation of that Doha Agreement. And the response from the White House was silence.
Yeah.
And so that gave them a green light to do whatever they wanted to do. And as they moved forward, before we even left, they were mandating that the regional mullahs would give names of little girls, all the women to be sex slaves. I would call them brides to Taliban's for their service to the Taliban, and we just seen that taking place right away. And they were killing people and executing people and dismembering people right on the streets outside the airport. Our brave military warriors who wanted to do something about it could not do anything about it. They were forced to sit there.
We saw the image of the Black Hawk helicopter and somebody hanging from it, right?
Yeah.
I mean so that's just a small. We didn't see in the news a whole lot about it because they didn't want to cover the story.
They didn't want to cover it because it's a violation of the Doha Agreement. So that would have meant, hey, all this that we talked about, now we have to back off. We need to call this off because they violated the agreement from day one. But that's why they didn't want to see they didn't want to show a lot of that. They showed stuff like desperation at the airport. You saw the people hanging on planes. But you didn't see a lot of stuff. We didn't see in the news the executions on the street.
Right.
We didn't see the women.
It's a common theme, by the way, with our press today. They don't cover a lot of things.
They don't cover a lot of
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's a reason my book Saving Aziz came out. Right. I had my Instagram had 12 million engagements per month over the last year. The month my book came out, it has a 500,000. So
the algorithm.
So they pretty much shut down that. They don't want that conversation to be
Twitter
out.
might not.
Twitter doesn't. But I mean, Twitter. So you're trying to catch up, right? Because it's so many years of that.
Right.
But I mean, they didn't want to show like, and I think the American people needed to see. They had these women. These women were so desperate. Imagine if you're listening as a mom, being so desperate. You have your baby, some of them newborns, and you're so desperate that you don't want your son to grow up to become brainwashed in a madras to become a Taliban. You don't want your daughter to become a sexual slave for the rest of her life. So you kiss your baby goodbye in a crowd of hundreds of thousands of people or 100,000 people or so. And you kiss your baby goodbye and you put it on top of a crowd like a beach ball to be surfed to the wall. And whoever's at the wall, they knew to throw that baby as hard and high as they could to make it over the wall so the military might give it a chance. Wow. And what they didn't realize on the other side of that wall was concertina wire, like 6 feet high, 20 feet deep. My buddy Joe counted 6 babies that bled out in that concertina wire. Like that's the level of desperation that we created. And now that we're going, 100% there's still Americans there that went out. And there's our allies.
2 years later, still American lives in Afghanistan.
40 million people there left the Taliban is not a governing body.
Right.
The people are starving.
It's a cartel.
Yeah. So the people are starving, freezing to death. 20 million women. No one wants to speak about this, but it's so important the world knows about this because we did this. When I say we, I mean I'm American, and our White House did this, which makes me part of it. We did this. We elect our people, and this is what happened. There's 20 million women there. That are sexually enslaved. Little girls as young as 9 years old are being sold to 50-year-old men to be sexually enslaved the rest of their life. Women have these are some of these women that never even born into this. They grew up in freedom. They were school teachers, doctors, dentists, college professors. They were serving in government. They're not even allowed to have health care now. I mean, it's forbidden. They can't go see a male doctor, but women are allowed to be doctors. They're allowed to be educated to be doctors. So there's no health care. They're treated like garbage, and they're not even allowed to go outside. They go outside without a male escort and have a legitimate reason to be outside with a male escort. They're going to be beaten or maybe killed. And so as Americans and citizens of America, I think there's a burden of responsibility to say, hey, this is why we vote, why it's important who we vote. I mean, we heard like elections have consequences. Not just us, not just in gas prices. But think about the consequences of 20 million little girls left behind there.
So here you have, ironically enough, Women's Month, and men can be women now, right? So men in dresses and being creative.
Been a few awards given to men that are like Women of the Year.
That's what's going on in the U.S. And you were thinking, I wonder why we're losing our virtue in this country and our will to fight. Not that you've lost your will to fight, but many Americans in terms of their hearts and minds, right? Popular opinion, right, is swayed against getting in any kind of entanglements, right? And then literally over in Afghanistan, where we were hoping to build some kind of Jeffersonian republic 20 years ago, now you have women being sold into sex slavery and being traded like cattle.
In 20 years, in a period of 20 years, the Afghan government had more women serving in their government as a racial-wise than we do. So there was so much progression there.
Sure.
And they were doing a good job, by the way. And these women are now, I mean, they didn't get out. They're now there as slaves.
I want to get to one thing, and I know there's so many things to talk about. And this book, I want to encourage people definitely to read this book. This is an amazing story. But but I can't help but think of the parallels. You went after the one. Jesus goes after the one. Yeah. We see that in the Gospels. But you went after the one, and you ended up in a situation where you're not just saving a great friend, a best friend, and somebody that you were brothers in arms, but you also went back. You saved American lives, and you even rescued many Afghan citizens, pro-American, pro-freedom, pro-democracy from the evil of the Taliban. How did that happen? Tell us a little bit about that. How did it turn from the one to the thousands?
Well, God equips us and calls us, and we know most of the time we don't even know what He's equipping us for or calling us to. But when we feel that burden, I think we feel that burden and God's calling us. We have an obligation to be obedient and just say yes, and then see what God's going to do. And that was certainly a case with this. My heart was burdened for Aziz. It was a very easy decision to say, yeah, I'm going to go get him. My wife wouldn't have a husband, or my kids wouldn't have a father if it wasn't for Aziz. So that was an easy decision. Helping others who I didn't know is not so easy a decision. But again, sometimes we just have to be obedient when God is burdening us, and then you see Him start opening doors and orchestrating things. And that's what happened with this. I put together this team, came through different groups, and we ended up with about 12 special operations veterans, and we're planning this rescue operation. And one of the guys brought up these 3,500 orphans that had just been left. The reason they were left because people were it's like drowning. People were getting out. So the people that were watching these orphans left them. And one of the guys brought up, hey, this is bigger than Aziz. We need to help these orphans. And then we paused for a second and said, let's help. We have some amazing groups of Force Recon Marines and Green Berets, and some of the guys from CIA Ground Branch, the paramilitary unit for our intelligence agency. Some very experienced guys. And we got all this experience. God's burdened our heart to do more and more and more. We feel like this compulsion. All of us, we're Christians. We need to just be obedient to that call that we're all feeling, and help as many Americans, interpreters, their families, women, children. Let's help as many people as we can. And honestly, we've been given a lot of credit for this. I got credit on the House floor. Congress acknowledged it. I got the Bonhoeffer Achievement Award. So we got a lot of credit for it, but the truth is it's kind of hard to accept that, because the only thing I felt like we did well was just said yes to that obedience. Yes. That was yes and obedient to that calling. Beyond that, I'm not smart enough, capable enough to pull off what happened next. It was sheerly a divine miracle that's the only way I know how to describe it, because a series of events happened in the next 3 days that allowed everything to take place and those 17,000 people to be rescued. The one was a lady named Sarah Verardo, was part of our team. She called the Joint Chiefs and asked permission for a group of special operations veterans, us, to be able to have access to go to Hamid Karzai International Airport and go off base and do rescues, which they wouldn't allow the military to do. And so you think that's an impossible, you already know the answer. It's like a no from General Milley to say yes to that. And by the way, there's a lot of negative stuff towards General Milley, and I don't agree with General Milley on a lot of stuff, but credit to him. He's the one that said yes to us being able to go do this.
Yeah.
And so we were the only civilians allowed to go in Hamid Karzai International Airport. There's a lot of great nonprofit efforts working there. Most of them were coordinating things back from here, but we were actually allowed to go on Hamid Karzai International Airport, leave the airport, rescue people, come back, and they were going to vet our manifest. So that's an impossible. That was the first miracle I believe that we saw happen. The second was, now we're going to be able to move people out of Afghanistan, but as soon as they cross the border, if you don't have a visa for them, or a place to bring them, you're essentially human trafficking. So you have to have a place that's going to accept them, because these are SIV visa applicants, P1, P2 visa applicants. These are asylum seekers. I'm not the State Department. A lot of people were giving us a hard time. You're bringing these people, you don't even know who they are. I don't have the ability to bring people to America like the State Department does. I just had the ability to get them out of that country. Yeah. And we did a very good job of vetting who they were and getting them manifest approved by State Department, which they were not even doing that for the U.S. military. So we were highly vetting our people. And so the second miracle that so happened was we had to figure out where to bring them to, right, to not human traffic people, because it's against the law, unless you're in Laredo, Texas.
Right. Yeah.
But in the real world, you have to have permission. So we had some contacts to the royal family of the United Arab Emirates. One of our team members had a close relationship there. We called them, coordinated this call, and I briefed them on what we were going to be doing. And after about an hour-long briefing, they said, we'll roll out the red carpet and allow you to use our humanitarian center. And we'll give you a C-17 plane with pilots to be able to do, and if you fill that up, we'll give you another one. The third miracle I think seen happen was resources. Glenn Beck called me. And he called out of the blue. And because we had done, and this is like the third day, he calls me up and he says, Chad, I got on the radio because I just want to do something. I felt like compelled to do something. And I thought I'd raise a few $1,000s. Well, in 3 days, I raised $21 million. Over like the whole period of time, he raised like $46 million. But he didn't have an operation. So he's like, what do I do? And I was like, hey, well, we're going to be doing rescue operations. We need planes. So a guy named Rudy Atala from Glenn Beck's organization partnered with us. Mercury One is his organization. Partnered with us at Mighty Oaks in the Save Our Allies effort, right? We all kind of came together on it. And the Rudy Atala managed all those purchase of those flights. So it was just, God just brought everyone together, all the right resources together and opened these doors. And, we launched this operation over the period of 10 days. We didn't know how much time we had, but we ended up being at the airport for 10 days. Our ground teams were going out. We were coordinating, leading the effort in Abu Dhabi and back in the stateside. Sarah was leaving a team back in the stateside to manifest everyone. And no one stopped. That 10 days was like, if you stopped to sleep for 5 minutes, you felt like you were trading at 5 minutes of sleep for someone's life. And you literally were. And Sea-Spray, my buddy Sea-Spray in the book lost 37 pounds in 10 days, like just going to get people. Wow. And at the end of that 10 days, the Abbey Gate blew up, was blown up, and they murdered 13 of our service members and 100-something Afghans and injured another 60 of our service members.
Those lives never be forgotten.
No.
That's my prayer, yeah.
And that did not have to happen. It happened because the State Department was running the NEO operation and put the Taliban at the perimeter. That's who. And so, when that happened, we knew the effort was over for air evacuating people out of Hamid Karzai International Airport. The U.S. military left, but we didn't have to leave. That's when we recognized that the White House is saying there's 100 Americans here, and we know there's thousands. There's no way we could leave because we're not leaving one American behind. And the White House is saying things like, well, they don't want to leave because all they have to do is come to the airport. Imagine you're a 20-year-old American, humanitarian, like you're teaching English, you're working in a women's hospital, you're a missionary, and now you're supposed to go with your blue passport. Some little, from Lynchburg, Virginia, 20-year-old Liberty student wanted to go out and do the right thing. She's supposed to show her blue passport to the Taliban, who has a AK-47 and is murdering people in the street right in front of you. You're going to show your blue passport to that person? That's who's controlling that perimeter. And the White House is telling them, just go to the airport. They knew, they were not naive. They knew that our American citizens could not do that. Right. And they were not allowing our military to go out and rescue these people. And so in my heart, and there was no way we could leave. And so we chose to stay. We led a coalition of effort. A lot of amazing nonprofits were involved in that, like Task Force Argo, Samaritan's Purse, Mercury One. I can name a bunch of them. Pineapple Express. They were all working from here, coordinating stuff. We ended up getting another 5,000 people out, and when that airlift ended, so that was 17,000 people. Everyone had pushed to the Panjshir Valley, and all these women and children were trapped there trying to flee. And the commandos that we trained were going to try to get these women and children across the Tajikistan border. And that's when we were like, here's one more thing we could do. We could help them identify how to cross the Tajikistan border because the mountains are 25,000-foot peaks. You might run at a 1,000-foot cliff. The Panjshir River that separates the borders, like ice water. If it stops, it's freezing. It's solid. The Category 5 rapids. And then in addition to that, the Taliban's there. The Chinese military is there. Chinese special operations. News are not reporting all this. Chinese special operations are protecting that border. The Tajikistan military, the Russian military had vehicle convoys of like 50 vehicles patrolling that border. It was pretty much impossible for women and children to safely pass without information from the other side. So another miracle took place when I got permission from the Lieutenant Colonel Waller at 3rd Force Recon Company to bring Staff Sergeant Dennis Price with me to cut him loose for a humanitarian mission. Amazing guy, amazing operator, like JSOC level operator, and one of the best scout snipers in the military right now. So he was given permission to come with me, and he and I went into Tajikistan, went about 12 hours through those mountains and spent 10 days on that border. We did about 90 miles of border reconnaissance and built 6 routes out. Like we would swim across the river every night, sneak past the Chinese and the Russians, and we swim across that river every night and built 6 routes out to be able to give that information to our government intelligence agencies that couldn't collect that information but wanted it, to NGOs and to the commandos to be able to safely evacuate. We don't even know how many we were able to evacuate. We were able to provide 6 routes out, and that kind of ended it for us because at that point the State Department had put a pretty good job of shutting down not only the ability to bring people to the United States, but even be able to bring people to other countries, which they should have no say-so in, but they do.
Yeah.
So
Incredible. I'm just thankful you said yes to the Lord and to his calling. I look at all throughout Scripture, there are all kinds of men and women who are called of God, the most unlikely of heroes, obviously, in the Bible, and God overturns expectations. But one of the things you said, General Milley, was the one who said yes, and I credit that to God, who ultimately the heart of the king is in the hands of God, right? That he bends it whichever way, and that includes the pagan kings of old, right, who had no faith in the Lord, but ultimately God controlled. He could influence, either harden their heart or grant favor. So here you are, you have this calling, but then God equips the calls, and he called, and he provides a way. And he obviously did for you.
Yeah, he opened doors that anyone that knows anything about the military is like, these are impossible doors to open.
Yeah.
I'm not capable of opening these doors. God, it's real easy for me to profess, God have that orchestrated this, because these are all impossibilities.
But you had the training, you had the expertise and the know-how, obviously, to do all of these things, to organize this effort. The money was there, praise God, but it needed to be organized, it needed to be led. I'm just so thankful it was you, and you have this story to share not only with our students, but with all those people out there, hopefully inspiring Americans, right, to step up to that call, ultimately answer the call of God, and then the duty to protect and defend their country.
Yeah, I'm going to get a chance to speak to the Liberty Business students today, and one of my biggest things to teach is whether you're in business or in life or in the military, when you have the opportunity, when God presents you with the opportunity to do the right thing, it's never a wrong time to do the right thing. You just have to, regardless if it's popular, regardless if it's the best business decision, it may not always be the most lucrative business decision, but when you have the opportunity to do the right thing, you do the right thing. And, I think I learned a lot about that from this, because I always kind of and if I'm honest, I always kind of put an ROI on everything, and my time in ministry. Like, okay, if I put my energy, my effort, my resources, my time into this, it's a good effort, but what are we going to get out of it in return? Like we as Americans, especially, we always look at ROI and everything. And we were doing this interview, and it was with me and Seaspray. If you're reading the book, you'll hear about Seaspray, but he does a lot of stuff in Ukraine with me right now. We're being interviewed about all this, and anybody could figure out why would it get Aziz, right? But the interviewer was like, why would you guys go help these people in Ukraine? In Afghanistan that you didn't know, and the easy answer is the right thing to do. And when you said that, but then the reporter asked Seaspray another question. She said, "But was it worth it?" And I had never heard that asked before. And he said he didn't even hesitate. He said, "It doesn't have to be." And I think I learned when he said that, I was like, that really summed up my last 2 years of being involved in this, and really was just like the most beautiful answer, because it doesn't have to be worth it to do the right thing. And I think sometimes we get lost in that. We think again we kind of measure, what are we going to get out of it? What's the return? What's the risk? Right? A lot of people were busting on us like if we were dumb about the risk. People were like hoping on publicly on social media, were like, what are you guys going out there doing, getting in the way of the military? Which we were not, by the way. We could never have not coordinated with the military to do this. And this was not a rogue effort. But people were like, you guys are going to get yourself killed. Like after 8 deployments in Afghanistan, the guys we had in our team, like, we didn't know the risk. Like, of course we knew the risk. But
that's right.
Was it worth it? I don't know. It's worth it to Aziz and his family. It's worth it to the 17,000 people. And I think it's worth it to God, or he wouldn't have allowed us to do it.
The economy of the kingdom of heaven is much different than the kingdom of men. And I agree, where you think about things in terms of ROI, John 15:13, greater love hath no man than this, than a man who is willing to give up his life for his friends, right? I think that as we look at these things, God ultimately has something else in store. It's not always about, the horizontal relationship we have with man, but ultimately vertical relationship we have with God. When Jesus Christ came, he came to one of the most insignificant by every economic or geopolitical indicator at that time, one of the most insignificant spots on the face of the planet. And here he is laying down his life for the sins of all mankind, right?
Past, present, and future.
Past, present, and future. And I don't think anyone, many people recognized, obviously, but there were a lot of others in the Roman Empire. The world was shook by it. Yeah. And could they have all predicted it? Absolutely not, because to as many as received them, there were many others who rejected them. Yeah. We're going to wrap it up for now, but brother, thank you so much for for all you've done for life, liberty, and truth, protecting Americans, and ultimately serving Christ. I know that you put your faith first in all that you do. Thank you for joining the Give Me Liberty podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you for watching the Give Me Liberty podcast. Please like and subscribe and share with a friend. What a great conversation we had with Chad Robichaux. There are two things that I want to speak to with regard to our interview. One is how policies really do matter. When you vote, when you get in the voting booth and you're voting for president, obviously the president has a lot of leveraging and a lot of power to make executive decisions based on executive authority. And the withdrawal from Afghanistan, in terms of a policy decision, in terms of the implications that it had a devastating impact on that region. And certainly in terms of America's position in world standing, it was an embarrassing moment for us. How much more we have to think about these policies as Christians. And it's so important that we are a part of the electoral process. Secondly, I'm reminded in Chad's interview that there are moments, and he said this very clearly, there are moments where he was making a decision and he did not know what the lasting impact of that decision would be to go into Afghanistan and rescue the lives of those Americans and those Afghans who were seeking refuge and asylum in the United States. He did not know in terms of the cost and what would be the ROI. But I can tell you this, if you go back to Hebrews chapter 11 and you see the hall of faith, there were many men and women throughout biblical history that we know they were looking forward to a better kingdom, a kingdom that is not of this world and a kingdom that would not pass away. And faith was the evidence of things hoped for, or rather the things that were hoped for, but the evidence of things that were not seen. They had to believe and trust in the Lord. And as you read in Hebrews chapter 11, it also says, they were men and women for whom the world was not worthy. I think there are many living saints right now, Christians who have given their lives to Christ, that the same could be said for them too. And because we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, we must look to Christ and press on and persevere in the faith. I have been so inspired by Chad Robichaux. I hope that you are as well. We'll continue to interview great and amazing Americans and Christians who are giving their lives, laying their lives on the line for Christ. Until next time, God bless you.